exactly the correct pronunciation. After all, it is ancient Greek. Who's to say? But he was born in Ionia, Asia Minor, not too far away from the area that we've been talking about. He used Parmenides' idea of the mysterious X factor. So again, borrowed material, right? We're still building on somebody before him. Okay, he may have been writing in answer to Empedocles' idea of change. He agreed with the idea of the four elements, so they've got all this in common. But he believed that any kind of stuff that we have always has been there. So that's not really new. He doesn't really bring a whole lot of new stuff, but he's another guy that shows up kind of bringing some of these other ideas together. And he believed that what is. Okay, also. He also looked in those terms. So he didn't think that there's any kind of new thing coming into the universe, it's just always been there. Again, what kind of worldview would that probably fit? Come on, I already gave it to you once. What is that going to fit? What kind of worldview?
Pantheist.
Pantheist, right. It's probably going to fit more of a pantheistic mindset. It's just, the universe has always been there, right? So we can kind of glean from what he said and pick up on his worldview a little bit. All right? All right, let's talk about the atomists. The atomists. That term atom, that concept of atom that we talked about is not new to not only our century, but not our last couple of millennia. Okay? This concept has been around for well over 2,000 years. The idea that the universe is made up of some little things that we can't see, and so we'll call them atoms.
But didn't alchemy kind of go along those same lines also?
What's that?
Didn't alchemy kind of go along those same lines also?
Explain a little further.
Alchemy was like, it's been a while since I looked at it, but before we knew about atoms or the first testimony of atoms, they were kind of like things that wove signs and symbols and stuff like that, kind of made up stuff and wove things together.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that we're along the same lines on that, but the atomists had a concept of the universe is made out of something. We've seen it tagged as air, which we can feel air, with our senses. We can't see it. We can see its effects. We can feel air as we move fast. There's that pressure that we feel. But they understood that there's something so small that we're not going to be able to identify it with our eyes. And so, if that's what you're meaning along those terms, that I'm not going to disagree with you. But the term has commonly been atoms for a long time. But Leucippus and Democritus are two of the well-known ones. They're known as atomists. I don't even put the dates on. Some of the people I'm not sure about when their date of origin, their birth date was. I don't put that. Again, I'm not real big on the dates thing. Some of this is so disputed that I just put it up there. Dates are disputed. We don't know for sure when the guy was alive. So why even bother? Democritus, they're pretty sure 470 to 360 before Common Era. So this is some pretty old stuff, is my point. And this concept is, even though they couldn't prove it the way we've been able to prove it empirically, they had that mindset of, we know that there's just got to be something smaller than what we feel, see, and that makes all this up. Okay? For them, the divine equals immortality and power. Nothing happens randomly, but everything happens from necessity. Has to, that's a little bit, what's a concept that we've learned in here? Free will versus what? What's the other term? Opposite free will.
Determinism.
Thank you. Determinism. Sounds a little bit deterministic, doesn't it? It's just got to happen. It's just going to happen. Okay. Let's see. Democritus was a professional student. As we've seen a couple of these guys, like Heraclitus. Okay, and wrote more than 50 books. In the 4th century, Christians destroyed his work. Okay. So once again, how much do we really know about him? Probably a lot of things were lost back in the day. All right. Sometimes when people had strange ideas, other folks, religious folks didn't like it. We're going to see someone later down the road. Religious folks didn't like him, and he ended up drinking some hemlock. All right. So, okay, everybody got that on the atomists? Any questions or comments about the atomists? All right, so for them, kind of the one thing would be atoms, but then, as we know, that's not necessarily really one thing, is it? That's many different types of atoms. Okay, the sophists. Let's talk about them. Now, we're getting a little closer to home now, with people that you have heard of. The sophists...
So all those people prior to that were the...
these are all pre-Socratic.
Existentialism.
No. Existentialism, we stopped talking about philosophy of religion. And now we've moved into the pre-Socratic philosophers. All this that we've been talking about is pre-Socratic philosophers.
Starting with Martin Heidegger.
Starting with Thales. Thales is the first Western philosopher. So you need to underline, you need to put a line above Thales.
Okay, first,
We're not talking about philosophy of religion anymore. Okay, the sophists were not interested in facts, but in making money by teaching to win arguments. Now, they make great lawyers, right? They make great lawyers. It doesn't really matter what the truth is, as long as I win the case at the end of the day. Okay? That's the sophists, all right? They're good lawyers. Think about them that way. Okay. And mostly they would do so by weakening their opponents, because you don't have to have the answers to look, superior in the debate. All you have to do is point out that your opponent doesn't have the answers. And that at least gives you the opportunity, even though if it never gets pointed out that you don't have the answers, sometimes by remaining silent, you still look better than the guy that opened his mouth and proved that he doesn't know anything, right? That's the way this kind of went for them a lot of times. It's just they weaken their opponents. They break down, and sometimes it'd be over mincing, trivial things, but they get their opponent tripped up to look like they don't know what they're talking about. And so, but we're going to see that with someone who uses that against them, and actually, it's kind of funny, uses a similar tool. Okay, most famous is Protagoras, who said once said a man is a measure of all things. Pretty humanistic kind of perspective. Gorgias was another. Antiphony and Thrasymachus show up later in Plato's Republic. Remember the excerpt that I had you read? That you were seeing a dialogue between Socrates and Thrasymachus, right? He was a sophist. So Socrates had a real disdain for sophists. He didn't have much time for that. He did a similar thing where he would trip people up, and he wouldn't necessarily give the answers, but he would just let it be known, make sure that they knew, that the public knew that they don't know what they're talking about. All right, he ended up making his opponents look like fools to the public. So he kind of used a similar tool. The sophists were more just weakening their opponent's argument. But for Socrates, he would just downright get his opponents to look like, prove that they didn't really know what they were talking about. And hopefully they themselves would acknowledge that, but sometimes not. With the case of Thrasymachus, he really never acknowledged what he had admitted. He didn't realize he had tripped over his own feet. Okay, but this is